corrected version with punctuation adjustments. They didn't even bother naming him. In a long row of metal kennels, where tails wagged and teeth flashed through the bars, one cage stood still, eerily still. Inside it, a German shepherd sat like a statue, sculpted in sorrow. His eyes didn't follow movement. His ears didn't twitch at sound. He was a creature with nothing left to offer and nothing left to lose. They called him K947, a number printed on a faded white tag, zip-tied his cage like inventory. Somewhere in a thick file, it said he failed integration, refused commands, and was emotionally detached. But no report mentioned that he hadn't growled, he hadn't attacked, he hadn't moved at all. That kind of stillness wasn't calm. It wasn't peace. It was emptiness, the heavy, endless kind, the kind that wrapped around his soul like a closing door. He hadn't eaten in days. When thunder shook the walls, or when metal slammed beside him, he didn't flinch. People walked by his cage and glanced quickly away, not out of fear, but out of discomfort. No one wants to lock eyes with something that has stopped, expecting to be seen. The shelter in Elmbridge had a strict policy. Dogs labeled unfit had a 30-day grace period before permanent removal. K947 had been there for a little over a week, just long enough for most to give up on him, and just short enough for someone maybe to still try. Lily Grant didn't speak much. Not at school, not at home, not unless she absolutely had to. At 10 years old, she had already learned that silence could protect things, like the fragile pieces of herself she wasn't ready to show the world. She lived with her grandparents in a creaky old house that always smelled faintly of lemon polish and quiet rules. Her parents had died when she was 6. People told her she was strong, resilient. But resilience, Lily thought, just meant learning how to cry without making a sound. Her grandfather, Henry, was the kind of man who fixed broken fences with a single nail and kept his words few and firm. Her grandmother, May, believed in neat curtains, early dinners, and silence after sundown. They weren't unkind, just distant, like furniture in a room that had forgotten it was once filled with laughter. Lily loved animals, not just in the way kids do, but instinctively, as if she could feel what they felt. Her notebooks were filled with sketches of dogs and birds and foxes she imagined she might someday meet. She had asked before, once when she was 7, again at 8, and a few more times in between. Every request had ended the same way. A quiet no from her grandmother, a firmer one from her grandfather. Animals are a luxury, he once said. We don't take in mouths we can't feed. The rule had become an unspoken law in the house. Over time, Lily stopped asking, but she never stopped hoping. Until one quiet evening in early spring, when she walked into the kitchen, holding a faded flyer in trembling hands. "No cost," she said, eyes fixed on the floor. "They're giving these dogs away. I can share my food with them." She added quickly, "You don't have to buy anything extra." Henry looked at the flyer, then at Lily. "Only if it doesn't cost us a dime, and it stays outside." Lily nodded once, heart pounding. It wasn't a yes full of warmth, but it was the first yes she'd heard in years. The flyer had been in her hand when she walked into the kitchen that evening. Creased, smudged, and clutched like it might fly away if she loosened her grip, but it had taken her days to find it. She hadn't been looking for anything. Not really. Just wandering the way she sometimes did when the house felt too quiet and the silence too loud. That afternoon, her feet had taken her to the library. Not for books, but for the feeling of being somewhere stories lived. That's where she saw it, tucked on the far edge of the bulletin board. A paper barely hanging on by one pushpin. The corner torn. Retired and failed K. 9 units available for adoption. No cost, no guarantees, one final chance. Lily had read it at least 5 times before she dared touch it. When she finally pulled it down, her hands trembled just slightly. Not from fear, from the sense that this was something fragile and fleeting, something meant for her. That night, after her grandfather gave his quiet, conditional yes, Lily sat on her bed and read the flyer again under her desk lamp. She traced the words with her finger like they were instructions to a secret she might one day understand, though unfamiliar with dog training. Lily's determination drove her to borrow books, jot down notes, and softly practice names at night, preparing herself for the journey ahead. She wasn't just preparing, she was hoping, the way some people pray. She had no money, no leash, no idea what came next, but she had this, a promise made in silence and a flyer taped gently to the wall beside her bed. The shelter looked nothing like Lily imagined. It wasn't warm. It wasn't welcoming. It smelled like bleach and wet concrete. The air buzzed faintly from fluorescent lights overhead, and the walls were painted the color of things people didn't want to look at for too long. Rows of kennels stretched down the hallway, each filled with barking, jumping, pacing dogs. They howled and spun in circles the moment Lily stepped inside, every one of them desperate to be seen. Everyone except one. At the far end of the row, there was a cage that didn't move. A German shepherd sat in the corner, completely still, not curled up, not alert, just still, as if the dog had forgotten what movement even felt like. Lily clutched the flyer in her hand. The corners wrinkled from how tightly she held it. Her eyes scanned the metal tags. K947. She knew it was him. There was no reaction when she approached. No bark, no growl, not even a shift in posture. Just those eyes, dull, distant, almost blank, but not empty, not completely. Lily knelt down, rested her fingers on the cold concrete just outside the cage. "Hi," she whispered, unsure if she was talking to the dog or herself. Nothing happened. A shelter worker passed by and paused. "That one doesn't really do anything," he said, not unkindly. "He's not like the others." Lily nodded. She didn't say much. There wasn't much to say. She stayed there for nearly half an hour, just sitting, watching. She didn't know what she had expected, but she hadn't expected this, a silence so thick it felt like grief. That night, Lily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The image of K947 burned into her mind. The way he didn't blink, the way he didn't even seem to breathe. There was something unsettling in how quiet he was. Not calm, not tired, just lost. She thought of all the other dogs, the ones that barked and jumped and begged. She hadn't remembered any of their faces, but she remembered his. She whispered into the darkness, "Max!" It came out of nowhere. No reason, no explanation. Just a name. Simple. Kind. The kind of name you'd give someone you didn't want to forget. The next morning, Lily borrowed more books from the library. She copied pages into her notebook. How dogs respond to tone. What fear looks like in their body language. Why some of them stop reacting at all. She went back to the shelter every day after school. She never asked to see another dog. Each time, she sat quietly outside K947's cage. She brought a blanket and laid it nearby. She read books aloud. Stories about dogs, about quiet heroes, about second chances. Her voice was small but steady. And every time she finished a page, she said the name again, just once. Max. He never moved, but his eyes began to change. They followed her sometimes, not always, but enough. It wasn't a tail wag. It wasn't a bark. But to Lily, it meant everything. Because sometimes hope doesn't show up loudly. Sometimes it's just a quiet voice calling a name that someone's been waiting to hear. 2 weeks had passed since Lily first stepped into the shelter. 14 days of quiet visits, whispered names, and pages read through the bars of a cage. Every afternoon, she returned, walking the same path through the shelter halls, past dogs barking for attention, until she reached the one who never made a sound. K947, still silent, watching without watching. That day, the air outside was cold enough to sting her fingers. She had wrapped a biscuit in napkins from school and tucked it deep into her coat pocket, not because she thought he would eat it. He never did, but because it felt wrong to come empty-handed. As she sat on the floor in front of his cage, Lily didn't speak right away. She placed the biscuit just outside the bars, close but not too close. Then she folded her hands into her lap and looked at him. After a long pause, she whispered, softer than ever, "Max." It was like a string had been plucked between them. His head lifted, not fully, just enough. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, they didn't drift away. Lily held her breath. Then, as if testing the weight of the moment, he stood. One step, then another, and a third. He stopped at the front of the cage. Not close enough to touch, but closer than he'd ever come. A shelter worker standing behind her let out a low whistle. "He's never done that before," he murmured. Lily didn't turn around. She didn't speak. Her throat was tight, her eyes full, because in that quiet, cold hallway, something had shifted. He didn't run to her, but he had chosen her. And somehow, she knew that would be enough. The rules had been clear from the start. Any dog listed under final consideration could only be adopted if they willingly followed the person out of the facility. No pulling, no dragging, no second chances. Most of the staff hadn't believed it would ever happen, not with K947. They'd seen too many people try to connect and fail. But now, there he was, standing at the front of the cage, looking at Lily like she was the only person left in the world. And that was enough. No one questioned her. No one hesitated. A volunteer opened the gate, and Max stepped out on his own. The leash was almost symbolic. He didn't need it. He stayed close by her side as they walked out of the building together, silent and steady. By the time they reached the parking lot, the rest of the shelter had gone quiet too. Not out of surprise, but out of something deeper, respect, maybe, or disbelief wrapped in something softer. Max had chosen, and by the rules, that meant he was hers now. The day Max came home, the air felt different. Quieter, heavier, like the world was holding its breath. He didn't ride in the back of the car. Lily sat beside him in the back seat, holding her backpack on her lap and glancing at him every few minutes. Max didn't look back. He sat perfectly still, his body tense, his eyes fixed on nothing. The house wasn't ready for him. There was no bed, no bowl, no welcome, just an empty corner of the porch where her grandfather had said he could stay for now. Lily laid down an old towel and placed a plastic container of water beside it. Reads as follows. Max stepped out of the car slowly, each paw like it was testing the ground for danger. When he reached the porch, he didn't lie down. He stood facing the door, his back to the yard. That first night, Lily sat next to him, wrapped in her coat. She talked about nothing and everything, about school, about her books, about how quiet the stars seemed. Max didn't respond, but he didn't walk away either. Inside the house, her grandparents watched from the kitchen window. They didn't say anything. By the second day, Max began to eat, but only when Lily stepped away. By the end of the week, he would rest near her feet, never touching, never sleeping too deeply. He didn't bark. He didn't wag his tail, but he was there. And sometimes being there is the beginning of everything. By the second week, the silence began to stretch. Max was still quiet, still watchful. He followed Lily's movements with his eyes, but he didn't play. He didn't seek affection. He didn't explore beyond the porch. It was as if he had drawn an invisible line around himself, and nothing could cross it. Lily didn't mind. She brought him water, sat with him each evening, whispered the name Max like a prayer. But not everyone was patient. One evening, as Lily cleaned out an old food bowl by the back steps, she heard her grandparents speaking through the open window. "I don't see the point," her grandfather muttered. "The dog doesn't bark, doesn't move, just sits there." "He's not causing trouble," her grandmother replied. "He's not doing anything either," he said, the edge in his voice sharper than usual. "She thinks she saved something, but that animal's broken." The words cut through Lily like cold wind. She didn't cry. Not then. Instead, she finished cleaning the bowl, dried her hands on her shirt, and went back to Max. He was sitting in the same spot, facing the same direction still. She didn't try to make him do anything, didn't offer treats or coax him closer. She just sat down beside him, knees pulled to her chest. "I know you're not broken," she said softly. "You just need time." Max didn't move, but his ear twitched. Sometimes love isn't about fixing or changing someone. It's simply staying close and not walking away. It started with a sound, sharp, but quiet enough that only Max noticed. His ears twitched. His body went still. Out on the porch, the wind had gone still too. Max stood up, moved to the edge of the steps, and stared into the dark. Inside, Lily stirred. A second later, the kitchen light flicked on. Henry appeared, already heading for the door. "Stay inside," he said. "I'll take a look." He had barely taken 2 steps when it happened. Henry hadn't even raised a flashlight before something heavy slammed into his shoulder. He stumbled, nearly falling, the light clattering to the ground. A figure lunged forward from the side of the house, gripping a short wooden club. Before Henry could react, Max was already there, fast, focused, fierce. With a deep, guttural growl, Max launched forward, colliding hard with the attacker. The man reeled back as Max stood between him and Henry, barking loud and sharp, not in panic, but in warning. The stranger froze. Then, startled by the force in front of him, he turned and ran, disappearing into the woods. Henry stood frozen, breath ragged, hands trembling. Max didn't chase. He stayed beside Henry, low and steady, eyes locked on the dark. Only then did Lily rush outside. "Is he okay?" she gasped. Henry didn't speak at first. He looked down at Max, now sitting calmly at his feet, still alert, still watching. "I didn't see it, but he did. I never saw it coming, but he did." Henry's voice trembled, a mix of awe and gratitude. "He stood between me and danger. He saved my life." That night, Henry laid the blanket by the door, not out of duty, but as a quiet invitation home. No words, no ceremony, just a small gesture that said everything Max needed to hear. He wasn't temporary anymore. He belonged. The morning after the break-in, the house didn't just feel safer. It felt different, like it had let out a long, tired breath it didn't know it was holding. Lily woke up early, before the sky turned gold. She stepped outside, her socks damp from the dew. Max was already there, sitting by the steps, not guarding, but simply being. His head turned slightly when he saw her, and for the first time, his tail gave a soft, steady wag. Words eluded her, but her presence spoke volumes as she sat beside him, sharing the silence that had become their unspoken bond. Later that morning, her grandmother quietly filled a second food bowl and placed it next to Lily's on the kitchen floor. "So he doesn't have to wait," she said, voice low, eyes pretending not to care. That afternoon, Max took 3 confident steps past the porch and followed Lily into the garden. No hesitation this time, just quiet trust. By the end of the week, he waited at the gate for her bus. By the end of the month, the sound of his paws became part of the home, like the ticking of an old clock or the way a door creaks when it's loved too long to be fixed. Henry didn't say much, but when he sat in the garage one evening, fixing the old fence hinge, Max lay beside him, tail thumping once. Henry didn't look down right away, just kept working. "You're not bad company," he muttered finally. "Not bad at all." That night, Lily watched them from the porch, her grandfather and her dog, sharing silence like it was something sacred. Since that night, something quietly shifted in the home. Warmer air, lighter steps. Lily laughed more often, her voice bright again, full of stories from school. Henry, still a man of few words, began muttering to Max while fixing things, as if the dog had become his silent apprentice. Her grandmother discovered Max preferred soft bread over jerky, and every morning, a corner of breakfast quietly ended up in his bowl. No one said it aloud, but the small, thoughtful act spoke louder than words. From the day Max entered their lives, the house had truly become a home,